We continue now at the top of Daf 80a Daf from Meseches Bava Metzia. This is Bava Metzia Daf 80a. The Mishnah says, "Hasocher es hapara lachrosh bahar." If somebody rents a cow in order to plow in the mountains, v'chorash bebika, and instead he plows in the valley, im nishbar hakankan, if the kankan, which is a part, it's the cutting part of the plow, if that breaks, so potter in that situation, he is going to be potter, because the fact that he plowed in the valley, it's actually easier to plow in the valley. That's not considered to be his fault. However, bebika, let's say he rented the cow in order to plow in the valley, v'chorash bahar, and instead he plowed in the mountain, that's already more dangerous. It's easier to break. So then, im nishbar hakankan, then if the kankan breaks, chayiv, he's going to be chayiv. Similarly, the Mishnah continues, Lodush bekitnius. Let's say he rents the cow in order to thresh with legumes, v'dosh betvua, and instead he threshes the grain. So potter, he's going to be potter. Lodush betvua, but if he rented the cow in order to thresh the grain, v'dosh bekitnius, and instead he threshed with legumes, which are more slippery, chayiv, so then he's going to be chayiv for any damage, mivnei sha'kitnius mechalekes, because the legumes are slippery, and that's what caused the damage. And Rashi explains, "Hasocher sapara lachro." She rents the cow to plow. V'chol klei hamachresh lebal haboker. The case over here is that all of the tools that are being used to plow, they belong to the owner of the animal. He's essentially renting it all out. Unaorav holchen and behemto, and then you have the workers, the young men. They're going together with the animal. V'zeh oches hadarvon lechavin para letalman. This person, it takes two people. This one is holding the goad in order to guide the cow to the proper area. V'zeh holech achar machrisha. The other one, he follows the actual plow, umachbed hayosid bekarka shebo habarzel, and then he kind of presses it down onto the ground. Shakorn kultur balaz vukankan. That's the reference to the kankan. That's the part that actually cuts into the ground. And masnisin, that's the kankan that is referenced in the Mishnah, the part of it that actually cuts into the ground. So again, chayiv, he's going to be chayiv in that case, meaning to say he's chayiv in a case when he did it in the mountain, when he said he was going to do it in the valley. Shaharim koshem lachrosh, because it's hard to plow in the mountains. Shasloim sham, you have rocks over there. V'dosh betvua potter, and again, let's say the idea was that it was going to thresh with legumes, and instead it threshed with tevua, with grain. So then we say potter. Im hechlik, it's potter if the animal slips, because it's less likely to slip on grain. But if it's the other way around, so then we are going to say chayiv. And the Gemara says, heicha de lo shani bo. Let's say the renter did not change the terms. He didn't take it to the mountain when he should have taken it to the valley. So in that case, man meshalim. In that case, who is the one that is going to pay? And Rashi explains, "V'hecha de lo shani." If he didn't deviate from the terms, v'ein lebal hapar l'tvoel lo klum, and the owner of the cow has no claim against the renter. V'elu shayu bepula. So it's actually the workers here who did something wrong. Hamanig v'ha'ochez yachad. You have the person guiding the animal and the person grabbing onto the tool, which is cutting, which is plowing in the ground. Sechirim hayu. They were hired. Eza mehen posheya b'shviras hakankan. Which one of those two workers is considered to be the one that's negligent in terms of breaking the kankan? That's what it means. Man meshalim, who pays among the two workers. And the Gemara says, Amar Papa says, the Nakat Parsha meshalim, it's the one that's holding the goad, essentially the one that's guiding the animal. He's the one that's at fault. He's the one that has to pay. Rav Shishi Bered Rav Idi, Amar Rav Shishi, the son of Rav Idi, he says the opposite. He says the Nakat Mana meshalim, the one that's holding onto the vessel, the one that's pressing down on the plow, that's the one that has to pay. The Hilchas and the Halacha is the Nakat Mana meshalim, it's the one that's holding on to the tool, that's the one that has to pay. And Rashi explains the Nakat Parsha, according to Rav Papa, the one that is holding the goad, essentially guiding the animal, he's the one that has to pay. Mardeya, hu meshalim, again, the one that's holding the Mardeya, he has to pay. Shelo kivin asapara yafa, the idea is that he has not guided the cow properly. Because of the fact that he guided it the wrong way, in terms of along the road that he was supposed to be plowing, that's what caused the kankan to break. And the other opinion of Shisha Breid Rav Idi, he says the Nakit Mana kankan, the one that's holding the kankan, he's the one that's meshalim, he's the one that should pay. Shehemik Yosem Midai Boretz, he pressed it down too forcefully into the ground, so he's responsible. And the Gemara said, V'hilchasa the Nakit Mana meshalim, the halach is that the one who is holding the plow, he's the one that has to pay. She'ilu lo hemiko Yosem Midai, had he not pressed it down too forcefully, lo haya nishbar b'ivas ashura, would not have broken just because they didn't go in that straight line. That's why he's the one that is responsible. And the Gemara continues, V'iduchta the mechazka gundri. Now let's say it's a place with a lot of rocks, then tarvayu meshal. and Tarvayu Meshalm, and then they both have to pay. And Rashi says, V'ida mechazka begundari shayadua lohem bahar shemala avonim v'tzunma v'trushin. They know that this particular mountain has all kinds of stones, hard areas. Then Tarvayu Meshalmim, so then they both have to pay. Shayal lohem leizarmo. They should have been very careful. Uvidvar muat she'iva safa manik hunishbar v'havadavar hamutal b'safik. Even with some small thing that the person guiding does wrong, it's going to break. Therefore, it's a situation essentially of a suffix, of a doubt, and they both have to pay. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Hamocher par lechaveru, if somebody sells a cow to his friend, V'yamar lo, he says to him, Parazu nachonasi, this cow gores, nashchonasi, it bites, batonasi, it kicks, ravtzonasi, it crouches, v'hayabam mum echad, and it really does have only one of those blemishes, usnafu bein hamum, and he essentially included it, he hid it among all these blemishes that it didn't actually have, hareza mekachtos, that's considered a mistaken sale, meaning to say, in that case, the buyer saw that none of these were true, it didn't have any of these blemishes, so he thought it had no blemishes. It turned out it did have one of them. That's considered a mekachtos. He essentially, the seller over here, misled the buyer. Now, mumzeh umamacher. Now, let's say he says this specific blemish, and it also has other blemishes which he didn't specify. The only one he specified is the one that it actually had, so ein zeh mekachtos. That's not a mistaken purchase, because he did specify just that one blemish which it actually had. Essentially, the seller was forthright in that case. And the Gemara continues, Tanya Namihachu, we have a brisa that says the same thing. Hamocher shifcha lechaver, if somebody sells a maidservant to his friend. V'yamar lo, he says to him, Shifcha zu shotahi, this shifcha, she's an imbecile. Nichvesi, she's epileptic. Mishumemesi, she's crazy. V'haya ba mum echad, and she did have one of the blemishes, usnafu bein hamum, and he essentially hid it among the other blemishes which she did not have. Hareza mekachtos, that's considered a mistaken purchase. Mum zeh, but if he says this blemish, he identifies one, umum acher, and it has another blemish, but he doesn't identify, so ein zeh mekachtos, that's not considered a mistaken purchase. And the Gemara continues, Amarle Ravacha Brei de Rava Ravashi, Ravacha the son of Rava said to Ravashi, Hayu ba kolamu min halalu, what if she had all of the blemishes? He lists a bunch, and she actually has them all. Mahu, what's the halacha? Maybe there, the buyer just thinks that it's an exaggeration. Amarle Rav Mordechai the Ravashi, Rav Mordechai said to Ravashi, Hachi Amrina Mishmei de Rava, this is what they say in the name of Rava, Hayu ba kolamu min halalu, if she actually had all of these blemishes, ein zeh mekachtos, that's not a mekachtos, again, because the seller was forthright in this case. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Hasocher esachamor, if somebody rents a donkey, l'havia le'achitin, to bring upon it wheat, v'havia le'sa'orin, and instead he brings upon it barley, he puts barley on the donkey instead of the wheat, chayiv, he's going to be chayiv in any damage that happens to the donkey. Similarly, tvua, let's say he hires the donkey to put upon it grain, v'havia le'tevin, and instead he puts straw on the donkey, chayiv, he's going to be chayiv in that case as well. And the reason the Mishnah gives is, mimnei shehanafech kasha kamasi, the reason is because volume is difficult for the animal, just like weight. The idea over here is, even though the weight of these items, the weight of barley is less than wheat, and the weight of straw is less than the grain, but you have to take the volume into account, and that's why it's problematic. And the Mishnah continues, Lahavi lesech chitin v'hevi lesech sa'orin. Now let's say he rents the donkey in order to bring a lesech of wheat, which is again a volume of wheat, and instead he brings a lesech of sa'orin, a volume, the same volume of barley. So then Patr is going to be Patr because it's the exact same volume and it's lighter, so it's no problem. V'yemosef al maso, but if he adds on to the burden, chayiv, then he's going to be chayiv. V'kama yosef al maso v'yechayiv, how much has to be added that he is chayiv? Sumcha somer mishum Rabbi Meir. Sumcha says in the name of Rabbi Meir, sa'ol legamol, it's one sa'ah for a camel, and shlosha kav and lechamor, it's 3 kav for a donkey, and again 3 kav, that is a measure of volume. And Rashi explains, V'hevi olesa oren shem kala mechitin, he puts on the animal barley, which is lighter than wheat. He's chayiv, he's going to be chayiv bekilkula with any damage, he's going to be chayiv in any damage. Im hosef gimel kav. Now Rashi adds over here, he's chayiv if he adds 3 kav. If he adds the volume that he's not supposed to add, that's going to be problematic. Now, even though it's a lighter item, so maybe you would say he's entitled to add a little more, that is not the case. We follow the volume. V'lo amrina, we don't say hoel v'asor and kalim, since the barley is lighter, yesh lo l'hosav ad kadei kovid lesachitin. So he has the right to add until it's the same amount, until it weighs the same amount as a lesach of wheat. Shemasa hachamor lesachitin chatzi kor, because generally speaking, a donkey is going to carry a lesach of wheat, which is a chatzi kor. So maybe you'll say that's what he's allowed to do. That is not the case. Essentially, the Mishnah is saying that it goes by volume. Because volume is difficult difficult for an animal just like the weight. V'kevan denafach lesach sa'orim kenafach lesach chitin, since the volume of a lesach of barley is exactly the same as the volume of a lesach of wheat, kasha lo tosefes, so if you add on, it's going to be problematic. We essentially follow the volume. Vehevi lesach sa'orim shelo hosef, and then the Mishnah said, if you bring the same volume of barley, so then he's potter and mesa if it dies. And the Gemara says, Itmar, it was stated the following machlokas amoraim on the Mishnah. Abaye says, Kasha kemasoi tanan, that the way to learn the Mishnah is that volume is the same difficulty as weight. That's the way that we understood the Mishnah when we read it. Rashi explains, Kasha kemasoi kidafarishas, as we explained. Aval bishain mason kavid kemasa achitin, even though it doesn't weigh as much as wheat. Hare nafchon kenafachit, and if the volume is the same, that's the problem. We go by volume. Vanafach kemasoi, and the volume essentially is like weight. It is problematic for the animal, and therefore, again, we follow the same rules. That's how Abaye understands the Mishnah. That's how we read the Mishnah. Rava Amar Rava says, Kasha limasoi tanan, that the way to actually learn the Mishnah is that it's difficult for the burden. And the Gemara explains, Abaye Amar Kasha kemasoi tanan. Abaye says it's difficult like the burden, like a weight, meaning nafcha kitikla, meaning volume is just like weight. V'imos of shalosha kav and chayv, and therefore if he adds 3 kav, he's going to be chayv. It doesn't matter that it's lighter. We follow the same rules that we follow 3 kav. But Rava says, Kasha limasoi tanan, it means it's difficult for the burden that's being carried, and therefore we say, Takla ki takla, you have to have the weight equal to the weight, V'navcha have a tosefes, and it's actually the volume which becomes problematic when it is added when the weights are equal. And Rashi explains, Nivcha ketikla, so the volume is like the weight. This is again according to Abaye. Nafach kasha kemishkal, meaning volume is difficult like weight. Hoel v'nivchan shava, since they have the same volume, hareo kemishkal shava, we treat it as though it's the same weight. V'im hosav shlosha kav, and if he adds 3 kav to shir tosefes lachamor, which is the general amount that you can add to a donkey, only up to that amount, lakalkal chayiv. So then if it makes damage, then if it causes damage, he's going to be chayiv. That's the way that Abaye understood. But Rava understands kasha limasui, that you have to read the Mishnah as it's difficult for weight, or for a burden, meaning to say as follows, Im hishve kovad hasaorin lekovad hachitin, if the person would put on the same amount of weight of barley as wheat, kagon shehosif saw shleim ala lesach, let's say he added a full saw on the lesach, because barley is much lighter, hare hir bahanafach, so therefore the volume is going to be much more, the rov hanafach kasha limasui, and therefore that abundance, that increase in volume is going to be difficult, and therefore it's the added volume which will be problematic, and that's going to damage the donkey. Tikla ketikla, meaning the weight is like the weight, meaning, according to Rava, it's only going to be that he's obligated to pay if the weight of the barley is the same as the weight of the wheat. Then the volume becomes the addition. Let's say you would have a case according to Rava, where the volume would be the same, and the weight would be less. We don't say that the fact that it's the same volume is a problem, and if you add just 3 kav, it's going to be a problem. Adding 3 kav is not going to be a problem because it still weighs much less. Because according to Rava, the proper text of the Mishnah is kasha limasui, not kasha kimasui. And the Gemara continues, Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, lahavi lesach chitin vehevi lesach saorin, if he was supposed to bring a lesach of wheat and instead he brings a lesach of barley, potter, he's potter. But if he adds onto the burden, then he's chayiv. So my lav, is it not? Isn't the Mishnah saying shloshes kabin, that if he adds 3 kav, that's a problem? That's exactly what Abaye is saying. Abaye is saying we go by the volume. If you add 3 kav, it becomes problematic regardless of the fact that it weighs much less. And the Gemara says, lo, no, that's not what it means. What it means is saw. It's referring to the fact that you added much more. You added a saw. Essentially, you added enough that it would weigh the same. But the Gemara says, but on it we learned, meaning on the Mishnah we said, Yosef al chayiv, how much has to be added onto the burden, and we say chayiv. So we said in the Mishnah, Sumcha Somer Mishum Rabbi Meir, Sumcha says in the name of Rabbi Meir, Sa'ol Gamal, it's a saw for a camel, Shlosha Kav lechamor, and it's 3 kav for a chamor. So it says explicitly in the Mishnah that just adding 3 kav in the case of barley is going to be problematic. Again, it seems to be like Abaye. And the Gemara says, Hachi Kamar, no, this is what the Mishnah means to say, Hecha de lo shani chitin, vehevi chitin, in a situation where he didn't change, and it was wheat, and he actually brought wheat, or sa'orin vehevi sa'orin, it was a case where he was supposed to bring barley, and he brought barley in such a situation. Kama Yosef al masov yechayev, how much does he have to add to the burden to be chayev? Sumchas omer mishum Rabbi Meir, Sumchas says in the name of Rabbi Meir, sa'ol gamal shlosha kaven lechamor, 1 saw for a camel, and 3 kav for a donkey. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, come in here, the following proof, Lahavi lesach chitin, if he was supposed to bring a lesach of wheat, vehevi, and he brought, and Rashi explains, my lav, is it not, shloshas kaven ki abaya, that the Mishnah means to say 3 kav like abaya, and the Gemara said, lo, no, sa'ah, it actually means you're adding a sa'ah. V'hachi kamar, and here's what it means to say, Lahavi lesach chitin, vehevi lesach sa'orin potter, if he was supposed to bring a lesach of wheat, and he brought a lesach of barley potter, v'yava b'shashina, and even though he changed from what he was supposed to do, sharei shina lahakal, because here he changed, but it was more lenient essentially. Now if he adds so much that it weighs the same as the wheat, then he will be chayiv because of the added volume. And then the Gemara said, this is what the Mishnah means. The Mishnah is making separate statements. Yosef, when it says how much does one have to add to be chayiv, it's not going on the case where he was supposed to bring wheat and he brings barley. It's going on the case where he was supposed to bring wheat and he brings wheat. Then how much do you have to add? And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Pei Amud Beis.